Alright guys, welcome back. We are getting close to the end of our first unit, the Age of Revolution, and what we're going to do now is, as we begin to close out the French Revolution, we're going to look at the rise of a man named Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, we're going to break this particular section up into two videos because it's a big topic, and I think one might simply be too much all at once. But again, we're going to focus today on the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and see why he became so famous, what he did in France. So, as we go through this section, what we're trying to do is focus on the events, on his rise to power. His fall from power is something we're going to cover a little bit later. But let's get into the beginnings. So, main idea number one, Napoleon rose from humble beginnings to become a national hero of France. Now, there's a couple of things I want to clear up right off the bat, a couple of misconceptions about Napoleon. Number one, the thing almost everyone knows about Napoleon is that he was short. But it turns out, in fact, he really wasn't. He was of average height. At about 5'7" or so, he was very, very average for his time period. You would not have thought of him as being short. So where does that myth come from? It comes from his enemies, particularly the British during the wars he's going to fight with them. They try to paint him as this tiny little guy to make him seem less threatening and more easily defeated. The other thing I want to clear up, and this is something I had never actually heard of until I became a teacher, but this, of course, is ice cream. And this ice cream is called Neapolitan ice cream. It is not called Napoleon ice cream. So if you've been calling this Napoleon ice cream your whole life, I'm afraid it's not. It's actually Neapolitan. There it is. All right, some background on Napoleon. Now, the interesting thing about Napoleon is he's probably the most famous French person of all time, or at least top 3, top 5, something like that. But he's not actually French. He's Corsican. He came from this island right here called Corsica, and this territory had been taken just before Napoleon's birth by France. So Corsicans have their own language, their own culture, but they're seen as kind of an extension of France. And because it was a French territory, Corsicans could go back and forth between France freely. And that's what's going to happen to Napoleon. At age 8, he's going to head off from Corsica to France to go to a military school. Now, he was not from a poor family. He was from a pretty low nobility, you might say. So he's not poor, he's not rich. He's kind of probably upper middle class, you might call Napoleon. That's his birthplace, by the way, his home in Corsica. So if you ever get a chance to go to Corsica, go see where he was born. And Napoleon is a pretty good example of what we call an opportunist. An opportunist. In fact, I want you to pause the video and read this quote from Napoleon. So if you read the quote from Napoleon to his brothers in a letter he wrote in 1793, you'll see that here's a guy who wants to win, right? Considering the alternative, it is better to eat than to be eaten. Okay, we're going to choose the side that is victorious, the side which devastates, loots, and burns. What does this say about Napoleon? Well, Napoleon joined the French Revolution pretty early on. And because France is going to find itself fighting war after war after war, Napoleon finds himself with ample opportunity to win glory and rise through the ranks. Napoleon was a man who was smart, great tactician. He was personally very brave, and he also he had like a sixth sense for opportunity, that the right time to strike, to maximize your effectiveness. And he was also really good at getting publicity for his up-and-coming, bravery and success. He was a guy who had a lot of friends in the newspapers who could put his name out there. And so he's going to have opportunity after opportunity to win fame. And by the mid-1790s, Napoleon is becoming a household name. There he is, leading his soldiers. Now, what really makes him a national hero, though, is a campaign he's going to fight in Egypt, of all places. And the reason he's going to Egypt is France was at war with Britain at this time, and Britain had a lot of trade bases in Egypt. It was a major trading route that the British were using. And so the theory was if Napoleon could go down there and cut those trade ties, it would hurt Britain, and they would be less able to defeat France in the war. And Napoleon wins a lot of fame during this campaign. He wins a battle called the Battle of the Pyramids, for example. Also, while he was there, he brought scientists and archaeologists and historians with him because he's an enlightened kind of guy. Another myth about Napoleon involves this thing right here. So there's Napoleon, of course. There is the Sphinx, and the myth is that the Sphinx lost his nose because Napoleon's soldiers shot it off with a cannon. And that is simply not true. The Sphinx had been damaged many years before. In fact, here's a picture way before Napoleon got there, and you can see it's clearly missing the nose. Another thing that Napoleon's armies found while they were in Egypt was the Rosetta Stone. Not that Rosetta Stone, but this Rosetta Stone. And the reason this particular thing is so important to world history is this stone is going to allow archaeologists to begin to unlock the mysteries of Egyptian hieroglyphs, to be able to read the ancient writings that had been basically unknown before that. All right, let's take Napoleon back to France. After his publicity-winning battles in Egypt, let's take him back to France. Main idea number 2 is Napoleon seized power in 1799 and became the dictator of France. We need to learn about what a coup d'etat is. And coup d'etat is a French phrase. Coup means to strike a blow against something, like to hit it, in other words. D'état means the state, the government. So you're striking a blow against the state. And what this refers to is when someone seizes control of the government. It's called a coup d'etat, or simply just coup for short. In November of 1799, Napoleon gains control of the government in a coup and becomes first consul of France. First consul. You can see there's Napoleon. This simply means he's going to be basically dictator of France going forward. Now, why would France want a dictator? After all, they just fought a revolution to get rid of a king. Why would they want a dictator? A couple of reasons. Number one, this is not 1789 any longer. Remember, 1789 is when the French Revolution began, but then France undergoes years of revolution and war and civil war and strife and, of course, the reign of terror, and it's just an absolute mess. And a lot of people were exhausted from all that fighting. And Napoleon looks to be a figure who can put France kind of back together again and restore some stability. He also promises to keep a lot of the revolutionary reforms in place. So it's not like you're going to lose all of your rights just because Napoleon takes over. Finally, and most important, I think, is Napoleon's victory on the battlefield. Everybody loves a winner, and Napoleon undoubtedly was a winner. Here is a famous painting of Napoleon called Napoleon Crossing the Alps, and this refers to Napoleon going across the Alps in a campaign to defeat the Austrians in Italy. And you can see him taking his army across the Alps, this tall, snowy mountain range in Europe. It's a very majestic image, but it's not a very accurate image. This is probably a more accurate version of what crossing the Alps looks like, but this one looks cool. This one not so much. That painting, by the way, is, as I said, very famous, and it's been parodied quite a bit. This is a very small selection. You can find lots more online if you were really interested. Again, Napoleon crossing the Alps. There it is in the real world. I have no idea who this random person is right here, but take a look at that painting. It is huge. Very cool. All right, last thing we're going to look at before we get into some other events in Napoleon's life would be his policies as leader of France. Now, remember, Napoleon did not come from a wealthy, well-to-do family. He was middle class. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't part of the elite either. And he believed that by focusing so heavily on the elite in France and not on the commoners, you really were missing out on a lot of potential talent. So as leader of France, he's going to establish government-run public schools called lycées. And these government schools would be secular, that is to say not religious, so they wouldn't be governed by the Catholic Church, and they would provide equal education for all the young men in France, regardless of stature. And this would provide France with a whole generation of new, educated, skilled workers who can help his government out. And because they got an advantage from this that they wouldn't have had otherwise, they're going to be loyal to Napoleon personally. Now, let's do a quick review here. Before the French Revolution, was everyone in France treated the same under the law? The answer, of course, is they were not. And so to try to achieve that equality under the law, Napoleon is going to push for what's known as the Napoleonic Code. Code in this case has nothing to do with like a riddle or something. Code in this case means like a group of laws. Think of like the Code of Hammurabi from ancient history, for example. This is going to be established in 1804, and it provides standardized laws that apply to all parts of France and all citizens in France. So everyone now will be equal under the law. That is where we're going to stop in this video. The second part of this section we're going to dedicate in the second video, where we talk about Napoleon becoming emperor, and then also placing a lot of obstacles in his way that will eventually lead to his downfall. So, to quickly sum up what we've learned about Napoleon, he came from Corsica, south of France. He becomes a soldier in the French Revolution, lots of opportunity to rise through the ranks and seek glory. He was a fantastic general, very smart, good. He was good with his soldiers, and he was also a great publicist. He was able to get his image out there and gain a lot of supporters. And as we left off, he had taken over control of France as first consul.